Hey everybody, my name is Jake. I am a software designer, a husband and a dad, and a musician too. I'm starting this YouTube channel just to see where things go and to hopefully share a couple of different things that I've learned along the way in my career so far. I'm not going to bother with a whole intro video right now, but I want to jump straight into what this video is about, and that is 5 resources that have really helped me as a product designer so far. So let's jump into number 1, which is Refactoring UI. Now, this is a book written by the guys over who are responsible for Tailwind CSS. Steve Shoger is the person that I was following at this time, and kind of the individual who I realized I can learn a lot from in terms of product design. And this was actually a resource that I came across when I was starting my career. I had landed a job at a small startup and I was a sole designer. And honestly, I really hadn't a clue as to what product design was and what impact myself as a product designer could have on both product and business. So when I picked up Refactoring UI, it was actually a really seminal book for me as I began to wonder how to actually answer some of these fundamental questions. Refactoring UI couldn't have come at a better time for me. The reason why it was so impactful was because Steve Shoger and the team over at Tailwind CSS really did a fantastic job of taking a lot of these questions that junior designers have and answering them all in a single publication or a single book, because it just very nicely, structurally explained every single element you'd expect that's needed when you're designing something, from typography to visual hierarchy, to color, to imagery. And it was just such a great resource at that time. What I actually really loved that Steve did as well was that he didn't just publish the book and explain these things through text and images, but he also uploaded a series of videos on YouTube where he did these sort of redesign walkthroughs. And these were completely mind-blowing to me because it showed me just how important the decisions we make as product designers are, and really how much opportunity we have to shape how a product functions and also how it looks. Ultimately, when people use a certain product or visit a certain web page, they're going to use it in a certain way. And we have the ability to help guide them to do what they've come to do. And so definitely check out those YouTube videos. I think even if they're a little older, it's amazing just to see Steve take an existing design and then just systematically go through explaining how we can clean things up, how we can change things, and how we can improve the overall experience while also making sure we're focusing on things like usability. And I love this approach because it really goes to show that product design, it's an all-encompassing process where you can make decisions on the fly, which really at the end of the day are helping the users. So check it out for sure. And I think there's a lot to learn from a series of videos like that, because sometimes when you're starting out in product design, just like I was feeling this way, you think that you need approval to make certain decisions, when at the end of the day, a lot of times we need to be the one spearheading and deciding on the fly what things make the most sense based on our experience with what user expectations are. So I definitely encourage you to go check out Refactoring UI, as I think it's a really fundamental resource that any product designer should have and can really help consolidate all the knowledge you need to start designing products. Okay, so for resource number 2, I'm going in a bit of a different direction. This is actually to do a lot with graphic design. It's interesting because kind of in the UX or product design world, a lot of times graphic design, I believe, gets a really bad rap, and people tend to kind of distance themselves from this idea that, you know, graphic design is all about communication or marketing or sort of static visuals and not thinking about the users. And I really don't agree with that. I think that a lot of times graphic design is so rooted historically in both society and in kind of the history of design that I think ignoring it or ignoring the lessons and the principles learned in graphic design is really to the detriment if you are a product designer yourself. And I guess I kind of look at UX in relationship to product design as kind of this Venn diagram. Now, I have no idea, maybe this is totally off base or I'm just making stuff up here, but in my mind at least, I see that kind of there's this UX sphere where we talk a lot about the entire experience holistically and how people use products. And then there's the other side of graphic design where it's really about communication and also how we present these ideas and how people perceive what they're looking at. So I think a nice way to look at this is that UX informs graphic design and graphic design kind of informs UX. And at the end of the day, I think you can only be a better product designer if you understand the fundamentals of graphic design. So what is this second resource about? Well, I'm sure all of you have heard of the master that is Chris Do in the graphic design / brand / design communication world. Chris Do is someone I was introduced to right around the time of discovering Refactoring UI, and it was a really nice complementary way to learn both about this product design world and also the graphic design world, the predicated, I would say, what we call product design today. So when I discovered Chris Do and his company, The Future, I realized that there is a wealth of knowledge over on his YouTube site, and of course the paid materials he offers as well. So in discovering his YouTube videos and a lot of the stuff that he does, I came across this really fantastic series called Chris Do and Milka Brokim Critique Type. I'm not sure if that's the full title, but basically, Milka is a seasoned graphic designer, an educator, and of course, Chris Do is Chris Do. And together, they have a series of videos where they essentially critique student homework that they've assigned that have certain constraints. So for example, they might give students an assignment, which is to create a poster using this content, but to only use one font size, for example. And so when they look at the best of the submissions, it's just an amazing experience to see these two seasoned designers discuss how important the relationship of elements are on a page, how important placement and visual hierarchy are. A lot of these things I think we tend to forget when we're designing using existing components such as fields or buttons. We get into this almost like Lego brick mentality where we just are putting things together. But in watching this series, you can really see how critical it is to understand how we perceive the things we look at and how the visuals play an important role in that. Yeah, so definitely check out those series. They're really long. Each episode can be 2 to 3 hours long. The fact that they're longer, I think, are really, really helpful because you can start to understand where these designers are coming from and how much their experience has informed how they immediately recognize what's working and what's not working. A lot of the time, I think we feel that design needs to follow a set of rules. But at the end of the day, there is some overlap too with this aspect of sensibility and understanding that design is also how things feel. And I think this series really plays a great part in understanding that. And I think that it really lends itself to understanding the fundamentals of things like typography and hierarchy and all these other aspects. So check it out. I'll link the series in the description below. And I think that it's something that anyone should really check out and can really strengthen how they do product design. All right, so resource number 3 is more Chris Do. So we talked about Chris and Milka critiquing type, and this next resource is actually completely dedicated to typography itself, called Typography 01. You might have heard of this, it's from The Future, but it's a resource that I think that really shouldn't go overlooked because Chris, he's both an expert at teaching, but also an expert at his craft. And I think with courses, there's this risk that courses often these days are a dime a dozen and people seem to be making them left and right, and so many of them are simply not worth your time. But I think the reason certain courses can be invaluable is when the person teaching or sharing that knowledge has the experience to prove it. And I think Chris is a great example, having had a very successful run in the industry, and ultimately it's because of his sensibility and understanding the importance of these fundamentals. So Typography 01 is a great primer on understanding the history of typography, of understanding the fundamentals of the makeup of typography. And after really going through this course, you'll realize how much product design has to do with moving around type and understanding typography. And I think it's easy to recognize who are good and bad designers based on their knowledge of typography. So there's probably a lot of typography courses out there that are great. This course itself really helped me, and I think it's a great resource if you're starting out, just because you get a crash course in the history of type, but then you can also get a lot of examples from Chris on how to apply these typographic principles to your work. For us as product designers, I think it's crucial that we know typography. And I think sometimes because we're primarily designing software, we sometimes think that we can skip or not really fully understand how typography plays a role in that. But whenever I do think of that, I have to remind myself of the Steve Jobs interview where he talked about the importance of taste and where typography comes from.
The only problem with Microsoft is they just have no taste, and they don't bring much culture into their product. And you say, well, why is that important? Well, proportionally spaced fonts come from typesetting and beautiful books. That's where one gets the idea.
So at the end of the day, even if we're designing software, we have to remember that typography has its roots in history, in the art of understanding how to present the communication that is the language we use. Okay, so we got 2 more resources to go. Next up is Universal Principles of Design. I got it right here, a copy. This is one of my favorite books on design, and I'm sure you've seen this floating around here or there, but I think it's actually an underrated and oftentimes unknown book, and I think a lot of designers are missing out on. So coming back to this idea of UX laws or UX principles, Universal Principles of Design does this fantastic thing where they have done us all a favor, where they've compiled hundreds and hundreds of the most common design principles rooted in psychological research, with all kinds of visual examples, case studies, examples from popular brands and companies, and it's all in this book. Ever since I read Universal Principles of Design, it's always been a bedrock of how I look at design and how I design products, even to this day. And the reason is because every time I make a design decision, I always ask myself, how are people going to perceive the decision I've made? Or what choices I've made will affect the person who uses that product or perceives that product. It's really just fascinating to read and understand that our psychological reactions and perceptions are a lot of times very similar. And that's really helpful to know as a designer, because when you're designing, you don't really need to always back up every single decision you do with research or with 100 user interviews. Most of the time we're designing, we need to make decisions on the fly, and understanding how generally people will perceive things can make you so much better of a designer than designers who have no clue what expectations they're trying to meet. So this book is definitely not one of those cover-to-cover reads where there's a narrative arc or story, as it's definitely more of an encyclopedia. But when I picked it up, I literally read every single principle from start to finish, just because I found how the book is written lends itself to a very easy to read format. Each sort of principle is divided into examples and definitions, and there's also a lot of pictures, which is great. And you really get everything in pretty much one page per principle. So it's a great resource to have on hand if you ever need to reference something. And a lot of these principles you've probably even heard before, but they put a description and explanation to each. So I really couldn't give Universal Principles of Design higher praise. I think it's one of the best resources out there, and I think every designer should have a copy. Okay, so we've reached resource number 5 in my list, and this is last but not least. It's Shift Nudge by none other than Matt D. Smith, or MDS. Shift Nudge is a course primarily targeting your UI skills, but I think it's so much more than that. This is a course I think that absolutely every product designer should take. For me, MDS is one of my design heroes simply because of his approach to design and how meticulously detailed he is in the work that he does. So anyone who's heard of Shift Nudge, I'm sure knows the breadth and knowledge provided in all the lessons, and I'm really, really happy that I discovered it. One philosophy I think I share with Matt is this idea that you really can't extrapolate UI from UX, and there are 2 domains that really have to work in synergy, and I think Shift Nudge is testament to understanding that approach. While of course some of you might not agree, and some people do feel that UX needs to be its own domain with UX research and focusing less on the visual, I really do believe that being a great designer means understanding both of these have merit, and if you can understand both, you can really be the most value to whom you're working with. I unfortunately still haven't finished my course of Shift Nudge, as I'm probably maybe 50 or 60% of the way there, but finding time as a dad isn't always easy. I think you parent designers out there will definitely understand that. One thing that I think makes Shift Nudge a killer course is that Matt gives homework out almost at the end of every lesson. That's deliberately so that you can actually take the principles you're learning and you can go apply them and learn through actually doing. And this is something that I saw for myself really make me so much better of a designer, simply because I took the things that Matt talked about, internalized them, and then put them to practice and realized, wow, there are certain ways you can do things that make way more sense, and just remembering these approaches or principles can really change how you do the work of design. And so I think Shift Nudge is definitely not for the faint of heart, and it's something that I believe takes a lot of time and dedication, but it's 100% well worth it. I definitely don't plan on giving up and will definitely complete Shift Nudge, but it's just a caveat to know before you take it that if you are taking it, don't just watch it, really do the homework and finish the assignments. You really won't regret it. All right, and that concludes my 5 resources that made me a better product designer. I hope you found that useful. This is my first YouTube video, so cut me some slack, hopefully, and I'll see you next time.